Good morning, everyone. My name is Marla, and I'm going to quickly hop on live this morning to talk about high ideals and bring back Herbert Hoover's speech. I've tried to re-edit it to bring it back to our time because what he says when he was around in 1928 and what is going on today is actually a repeating of history. So, let me begin. Since the turn of the 20th century, bureaucrats have destroyed American education bit by bit, robbing individual Americans of the ability to take advantage of the American dream. Herbert Hoover delivered his acceptance speech for the Republican nominee on August 11, 1928. I have substantially edited his speech to bring it up to modern times. In 250 years, America has built up a form of self-government and social system which is peculiarly its own. It is essentially different from every country in the world. This is Americanism. It is just as definite and positive a political and social system as ever has been developed on Earth. It is founded on a unique conception of self-government, the conception that only through ordered liberty, freedom, and equal opportunity to the individual will his initiative and enterprise spur on the march of progress and in our instance upon equality of opportunity. Has our system advanced beyond the world? During World War I, 100 years ago, during World War II, 100 years ago, we necessarily turned to the government to solve every difficult economic problem. The government, having soaked up every ounce of energy from the people for war, caused the people to feel there was no other solution for the preservation of the state. The federal government became a centralized despotism, which undertook unprecedented responsibility, assumed autocratic power, and took over the business of citizen. To a large degree, the government strictly controlled and organized all temporarily into a socialistic state. Even if justified in time of war, this amount of government control should not be continued in peacetime because it destroys our American system and our progress and freedom. After the war, the most important issue considered was whether governments should continue their wartime ownership and operation of many instrumentalities of production and distribution. We were challenged with a peacetime choice between the American system of rugged individualism and a European philosophy of diametrically opposed doctrines. The doctrines of paternalism and state socialism. The acceptance of these ideas would mean the destruction of self-government through centralization of government it would have undermined individual initiative and enterprise, which is the source that made Americans achieve unparalleled greatness. From the get-go, the Republican Party has admirably turned its face away from those ideas and those wartime practices. And today, Republicans are returning to the American system and freedom principles back in 1930s. We needed to elect a Republican Congress to demobilize many of our war activities. Back then, the two parties agreed with each other up to that point. When the Republican Party came into full power, it went back in an unwavering manner to the fundamental conception of the state and the rights and responsibilities of the individual. As a result, it restored confidence and hope in the American people. It freed stimulated enterprise. It reinstated the government to its position as arbiter instead of a body that is involved and influential in economic activities. Therefore, the American people were able to move forward while the rest of the world stopped and some countries went backwards. If one studies the causes that retarded recovery in Europe, they will find much of it due to the strangling of private initiative on one hand and overpacking of the government in the affairs of business on the other hand. Today we find ourselves in a similar position, and we need to elect a Republican Congress to demobilize the forces of evil operating in government, because the Democrats are resolutely waging a war on our American system and freedom, which, if we allow them to implement and change our system, would be a long step towards the abandonment of our American system and a surrender to the destructive overreach of government in private business. Because today the country is facing a similar difficulty and doubt over certain national problems, that is, a rise of violent crime, farm and economic relief, and renewable energy. Democrats propose that we must thrust government a long way into the business which give rise to these problems. In effect, they abandon the tenets of their own party and turn to a state socialism as a solution for the difficulties presented by all three. It is proposed that we shall change from freedom to a state control, letting and keeps you safe, allowing women to destroy their unborn babies up to 9 months, letting you die from fentanyl overdose, to sexualizing, demoralizing, and grooming your kids to living a godless, directionless life. If Governor Polis' agricultural relief program means anything, it means that the government shall directly and indirectly buy and sell and fix price of agricultural products, and you will be forced to buy electrical cars even if you can't afford it. In other words, we are confronted with a huge program of government in business. The effect of this would reach to the daily life of every man and woman. It would impair the very basis of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and not only for those left outside the fold of expanded bureaucracy, but for those embraced within it. Let us first see the effect upon self-government. When the federal government undertakes to go into commercial business, it must at once set up the organization and administration of that business, and it immediately finds itself in a maze every avenue of which leads to the destruction of self-government. The first problem for government adventuring into private business is to determine a method of administration. It must secure leadership in direction. Should this leadership be appointed, or should we elect leaders? The hard truth is that leadership in business must come through the sheer rise of ability and character. That rise can only take place in a free atmosphere of competition. Competition is closed in a bureaucracy. Political agencies are feeble channels through which to select able leaders to conduct private business. To avoid incompetence, corruption, and tyranny in government, entrusting individuals with too much authority over private business, the government sets up boards and commissions. To make sure that there are checks and balances, each member of such boards and commissions must have equal authority. Each has his separate responsibility to the public. And at once, we have the conflict of ideas and the lack of decision which would ruin any business. It has contributed greatly to the demoralization of our shipping business, our housing industry, the business of education, and our stifled sections and the medical industry. Moreover, these commissions must be representative of different sections and different political parties, so that at once we have an entire blight upon coordinated action within their ranks, which destroys any possibility of effective administration. Thus, every time the federal government goes into a private business, 541 senators and congressmen become the actual boards of directors of that business. Every time a state government goes into business, 100 or 200 state senators and legislators become the actual directors of that business, even if they were supermen or superwomen, and if there were no politics in the United States. Nobody of such number could competently direct commercial activities. For that requires initiative, instant decision, and action. It took Congress 6 years of constant decision to even decide what the method of administration Muscle Shoals should be. In the past, during the war, the government found it necessary to operate the railways. The operation continued until after the war. In the year before being freed from government operation, they were not able to meet the demands for transportation. 8 years later, we find them under private enterprise, transporting 15% more goods and meeting every demand for service. Today, America depends on the trucking industry to deliver 70% of all freight transported annually. In the U.S., according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, prices for transportation are 1,698.35% higher in 2022 versus 1935. The U.S. dollar has lost 95% of its value since 1932. The median wage of employed U.S. worker has held steady at about $21 per hour for several calendar quarters before the coronavirus outbreak. The wage of employees are today 3.6% pre-COVID, while wages adjusted for inflation dropped 1.7% last month. The government subsidizes 70% of the employee's gross salary, 100% of these paid at a minimum wage, up to a limit of 4.5 minimum wages for a maximum period of 12 months. That should be a sufficient commentary upon the efficiency of government operation. The government in business does not tolerate amongst its customers the freedom of competition, compensation for loss or injury to which non-governmental businesses is subject. Bureaucracy does not tolerate the spirit of independence. It spreads the spirit of submission into our daily lives and penetrates the temper of our people, not with the habit of powerful resistance to wrong, but with the habit of timid acceptance to irresistible might. Bureaucracy is chomping at the bit to spread its influence and its power. You cannot extend the death grip of government over the daily working life of a people without at the same time making it the Caesar of the people's souls and thoughts. Every expansion of government in business means that government, to protect itself from the political consequences of its errors and wrongs, is driven irresistibly without peace to greater and greater control of the nation's press and platform. Free speech does not live many hours after free industry and free enterprise die. It is a false liberalism that interprets itself into the government operation of commercial business. Every step of bureaucratizing of business of our country poisons the very roots of liberalism, that is, political equality, free speech, free assembly, free press, and equal opportunity. True liberalism is a force truly of the spirit, a force proceeding from the deep realization that economic freedom cannot be satisfied if political freedom is to be preserved. Even if government conduct of business could give us more efficiency instead of less efficiency, the fundamental objection to it would remain unaltered and unabated. It would destroy political equality. It would increase rather than decrease abuse and corruption. It would stifle initiative and invention. It would undermine the development of leadership. It would cramp and cripple mental and spiritual energies of our people. It would distinguish equality and opportunity. It would dry up the spirit of liberty and progress. For these reasons, we must resist it. I feel deeply on this subject because my parents and grandparents had some practical experience with government operation and control. I have read and studied not only at home but abroad the many failures of government in business. I have direct knowledge handed down from stories shared of tyrannies, the injustices, the destruction of self-government, its undermining of the very instincts which carry the Cuban people forward in progress. I have witnessed the lack of advance, the lowered standard of living, the depressed spirits of people working under a system. My objection is based not upon theory or upon a failure to recognize wrong or abuse, but I know the adoption of such methods would strike at the very roots of American life and would destroy the very basis of American progress. In 1954, microwaves sold for today's equivalent of $30,000. Now, they can easily be purchased for under $50. This steep discount isn't just some big box store's latest super sale. Rather, it's part of a broader trend of plummeting consumer good prices in recent decades. In large part, this trend dates back to the aftermath of World War II, a time during which producing goods became faster and cheaper than ever before. In the late 1930s, the United States imported nearly 97% of its rubber from plantations in Southeast Asia. But around this time, we have seen the resultant growth of large units of production and distribution. This is big business. Many businesses must be bigger, for our tools are bigger. Our country is bigger. The American people, from bitter experience, have a rightful fear that big business might be used to dominate our life and by illegal and unethical practices destroy equality of opportunity. And you can see that with Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and almost every social media out there. The Republican administration has tried for years to correct evils by regulating evil. It develops methods by which abuses could be prevented while keeping the full value of societal progress for the public. It insists upon the principle that when great public utilities were closed with the security of partial monopoly, whether it be healthcare, education, energy, telephone, or whatnot, then there must be the fullest and most complete control of rates, services, and finances by government or local agencies. It declares that these businesses must be conducted with glass pockets. More than 60 years ago, Carnegie Corporation coined the term glass pockets to bring more transparency to the American people. Though through the years, the Republican Party insisted upon the enactment of laws that not only would maintain competition but would destroy conspiracies to destroy the smaller units or dominate and limit the equality of opportunity amongst our people. And what have been the results of our American system? Today, our country has become the land of entitlement instead of opportunity to those born without inheritance, not merely because of the wealth of its resources and industry, but because government has stifled freedom and free enterprise. Russia has natural resources equal to ours. Her people are equally industrious, but she has not had the blessing of over 250 years of our form of government and our social system. By adherence to the principles of decentralized self-government, ordered liberty, and equal opportunity and freedom to the individual, our American experiment in human welfare has yielded a degree of well-being unparalleled in all of the world. It has come near to the abolition of poverty, which is now creeping up again because of Governor Polis and the Democrats, to the abolition of fear of want than humanity has ever reached before. Progress of the past 100 years is the proof of it. This alone furnishes the answer to our opponents, who ask us to introduce destructive elements, into the system by which this has been accomplished. Let us see what this system has done for us in our recent years of difficult and trying reconstruction, and then solemnly ask ourselves if we now wish to abandon it. As a nation, we came out of several wars with great losses. We made no profit from it. The apparent increase in wages were at the time fictitious. Today we came out of a pandemic with great losses, and increases in wages were at that time fictitious. We were poor as a nation when we emerged from the war, and we were poor as a nation when we emerged from the pandemic. Yet during years after the war, we have recovered from these losses and increased our national income by over 1/3. even if we discount the inflation of the dollar, today has increased at an annual average rate of 2.1%, and the rate of inflation is 8%. Do you think we can recover our losses like we did in yesteryears? That there has been a wide change in the diffusion of wealth and income since the pandemic is marked by 100 proofs. I know of no better test of the poorer conditions of the average family than the sharp decrease in wealth ownership in the last 20 years. This is according to the data from the Federal Reserve, which calculates household wealth as net worth, the value of assets subtracted by the liabilities and debts owed. Overall, household wealth fell roughly 18% from the third quarter of 2007, while the wealth of the middle 20% of income earners has grown 68% since 1990. These households went from owning 12% of wealth in 1990 to 7% in 2020. The middle class share of wealth has fallen 2% points since the first quarter of 2009. In that same time, the share of wealth owned by the top 1% of income earners has increased 6% points. We have decreased in home ownership. We have diminished the investment of the average man and woman, and household wealth is expected to take an even greater hit. In addition to this evidence of smaller savings, our people are steadily losing their buying power for a lower standard of living. In 1980, 87.2% of American households owned one or more motor vehicles, but through automobile ownership is virtually universal, the motor vehicle no longer acts as a progressive force for change. New forces, the electric media, the laser, the computer, the robot, probably foremost among them, are charting the future. AI. A period of American history that can appropriately be called the automobile age is melding into a new age of electronics. We are no longer progressing. Got it. We are no longer progressing. Yes, Americans have more to eat, better things to wear, and better homes. Wages have increased, but the cost of living has increased. The job of every man and woman has been made less secure. We have, in this short period, increased the fear of poverty, the fear of unemployment, the fear of old age, and these are fears that are the greatest calamities of humankind. All this means far less progress than greater creature comforts. It finds 1,000 interpretations into a lesser and diminished life. In 7 years, we have added 70% to the renewable energy at the elbows of our workers and further promoted them from carriers of burdens to directors of machines. We have steadily reduced human labor. Our hours of labor are lessened, our leisure has increased. We have less money today than we did 100 years ago. We have expanded our child care hours and expanded many hours at work. We can't afford to attend a baseball game. We pour into outdoor recreations in every direction. The number of visitors at our national parks are comforted, and number of sportsmen fishing in our streams and lakes has decreased by 10%. that the shorter time between bites is becoming a political issue. In these 7.5 years, social media has brought anger and hatred and distrust and political censorship to almost every online activity. Springing from our prosperity with lesser freedom, its vast endowment of elites in science, and the greater resources with which to care for public health, we have, according to our insurance actuaries, during this short period since the war or the pandemic, diminished the average span of life by nearly 8 years. We have increased infant mortality. We have vastly increased the days of illness and suffering in the life of every man and woman. We have diminished the facilities for the care of the vets, crippled and helpless and deranged. From our increasing resources, we have expanded our educational system to full days from an outlay of $7 trillion. The education of our youth has become almost our largest and certainly our most important activity. From our greater income and thus our ability to free youth from toil. Overall, more than 20% of students in high school are chronically absent, compared with more than 14% of students in middle school. Today, we have more youth in remedial learning, twice over all the rest of the world put together. We have made notable progress in being the dumbest nation in public taste. We have made progress in graduating functional illiterates of every branch of American life. Never in our history was the lack of leadership in our economic life more distinguished in its abilities than today. And it has grown greatly in its consciousness of public responsibility, leadership in our professions, and in moral and spiritual affairs of our country was never of a lesser order. And our third world educational system is bringing forward a host of recruits for the succession of our leadership. I do not need to recite more figures and more evidence. I cannot believe that the American people wish to abandon or in any way weaken the principles of economic freedom and self-government, which have been maintained by the Republican Party and which have produced results so amazing and so stimulating to the spiritual as well as the material advance of the nation. Denver has been an outstanding beneficiary of this great progress and of these safeguards principles. With its suburbs, it has during the last 31.5 years grown by over 1.5 million of people until it has become the largest metropolitan district. Here, you have made abundant opportunity not only for the youth of the land, but for the immigrants from foreign shores. This city is the commercial center of the United States. It is the commercial agent of the American people. It is a great organism of specialized skill and leadership in finance, industry, and commerce, which reaches every spot in the country. Its progress and its beauty are the pride of the whole American people. It leads our nation in its benevolence to charity, to education, and to scientific research. It is the center of art, music, literature, and drama. It has come to have a more potent voice than any other city in the United States. But when all is said and done, the very life, progress, and prosperity of this city is wholly dependent on the prosperity of the 2,897,000 people who dwell in our mountains and valleys across the 3,000 miles to the plains. Every activity of this city is sensitive to every evil and every favorable tide that sweeps the great nation of ours. Be there a slackening of industry in any place, it affects Denver far more than any other part of the country. In a time of inflation, 8% of all the unemployed in the United States can be numbered in this city. In a time of prosperity, 16.4 million visitors a day of the great interior of our country pour into Denver for business and entertainment. In fact, so much of the city, the reflex of the varied interests of our country, that the concern of everyone of your citizens for national stability, for national prosperity, for national progress, for preservation of our American system is far greater than that of any other single part of the country. We still have great problems if we would achieve the full economic advantage of our country. In these few years, some groups in our country have lagged behind others in the march of progress. I refer more particularly to these engaged in the hospitality, oil, and agricultural industry. We can assist in solving these problems by cooperation of our government. To the agricultural industry, we shall need to advance initial capital to assist them to stabilize their industry. But this proposal implies that they shall conduct it themselves and not by the government. It is the interest of Colorado that we shall bring agriculture and all industries into full stability and prosperity. I know you will gladly cooperate in the faith that in the common prosperity of our country lies its future. Paid for and approved by elect Marla Fernandez campaign. To donate to Marla Fernandez campaign, simply click on the donate button below and write your name and address and your job title below and hit submit to send me your information. In this way, I alert the Colorado Secretary of State and the powers that be can make sure you are a U.S. citizen eligible to donate to my campaign. I am only allowed to receive $400 before June and $400 after June primaries from individual natural persons.